We wish him luck. And it's time now for us to take a look back at this week's headline-making stories in our Reporters Rewind. Our guests at the roundtable are Brandon Robinson. He's a sports writer at The Source magazine. Many of you, of course, know him well. Also joining us again is Katie Klabusich, who is a writer and reproductive rights activist, and Wallace Ford, an Arise News contributor and a political blogger and professor at Medgar Evers College, will be joining us very shortly on the set here. Well, both of you, welcome to the show. I want to start off, and we're going to, of course, talk about the Rice-Goodell story, but also I want to talk a little bit about the president's speech. And, of course, Brandon, you can chime in on this, too. Everybody has an opinion about this. Some people say perhaps this may be more of the same with the president. He really didn't announce anything new. But what a lot of people are concerned about, how long are we going to be involved in this particular, he's not calling it a war. I would say maybe he's calling it a conflict. Katie, what are your thoughts about that?
I feel like we've never called it a war. I mean, we've been there certainly for the last 10, 15, 20 years, depending on how long you consider it going back to. And we talk a lot about it as a conflict, or we're just going to take care of this one thing. And a lot of what was in that speech sounded very much like a path to escalation again. I mean, it sounds very reasonable initially, right? But America kind of has a long history of very initially reasonable sounding goals when it comes to foreign policy that then end up escalating. And it felt a little familiar. I hope that I'm wrong, but it was concerning for me.
Well, here's the thing. The president's polls are down, record lows, some would suggest. I believe that happens to be the case. But at the same token, a country that is somewhat pretty much war weary at this point, many polls suggest, I think it was the NBC Wall Street Journal poll suggested that Americans are all for some type of military intervention in the Middle East, specifically in this particular conflict. Are you surprised about this?
I'm not. I think people are kind of bored right now. I think that, with talking, kind of piggybacking off what you said about we've always been in these talks in this war. When I watched the president's speech the other day, I kind of felt like I was back in high school when we went to war in Iraq, when President Bush was announcing, that these findings were what they were. And I kind of feel like he's, in a lot of respects, carrying on tradition, if you will, based off of what happened a decade ago. I feel like the president's numbers are obviously low because we're still, numbers-wise, we're not looking good. People are still unemployed. We're in a recession, and things of that sort. But I think that I think it's kind of difficult right now. I think that this administration is better with other nations as far as talking with them and kind of getting them calm and stuff like that, as far as relations with other countries. But I really do think that it reminds me so much of last decade. I can't vocalize that enough.
Right, Wallace, you're joining us now. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So good to see you. I've been here all along.
Got the microphone a whole bit.
I've been here all along.
We live in a technical society here, and I'm not media savvy here, but I'm just wondering, because of what we've seen with these beheadings of two Americans, if Americans are basically more reactionary and they respond to this and gung-ho because of what they have seen, had they not seen those beheadings, would we be so willing, in terms of the polls that suggest, to go ahead and do some military intervention here?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to understand that this is part of ISIS strategy. When they do these public beheadings, this is a cultural tradition that takes place in a number of areas, not only in the Middle East, but in particular, we see it happening there, where indeed it's meant to inflame, it's meant to terrorize, it's meant to scare your opponent, as opposed to, I guess they could have just shot him or strangled him or something else. But beheading strikes everybody as being particularly bad. But you're dead no matter what takes place here. But it's, we're responding to terror tactics just the way they want us to. And, history is a difficult thing for people to learn. The reality is what we're dealing with right now, and I think you mentioned it just a moment ago, what we're dealing with right now is the aftermath of the Bush-Cheney debacle, which took place now over 10, 12 years ago. And people say, well, no, it's Barack Obama's war now, and it's Barack Obama's situation, but it's not. It really isn't.
But here we have a key point here. Barack Obama's debacle. And here we have a situation here, we're beyond midterm elections right now, okay? And even the president himself said that perhaps this could be maybe 3 years or more, we don't know. I'm gonna call this a hot potato. He's gonna pass this hot potato off to the next president. And the next president may have Barack Obama's debacle if we can't quash ISIS in a concerted manner and soon. Katie, what are your thoughts?
I think that sounds possible. I mean, if he's just trying to make sure we get past the midterms without this hurting the Democrats, I mean, putting it off, the midterms are right around the corner. The thing that's most troubling to me, and Wallace really alluded to it, is that the disproportionate response provocation. I mean, that's what the 9/11 was about, right? Was about provoking a disproportionate response where America would be stuck in a long-term, expensive, deadly war. And if that's what was going on with the beheadings, was to provoke us into being, more involved in the region, then we should be measured about our response to that, even though we'd like to react
but
in
this
kind.
whole situation, it's really a tar baby, all right? But it's a Bush-Cheney tar baby, and to call it a Barack Obama's debacle is just not looking at, with all due respect, I mean, it's not taking the entire historical context.
I'm just being the advocate here.
No, I understand. It's inheritance.
And so you just can't say, well, Barack Obama should do something with where an entire region has been totally destabilized.
Right.
And there was no strategy in the first place for doing what was done back in 2002, 2003. And so we're left with this, Barack Obama's left with, so I don't know if it's a hot potato, it's a big mess. It's a big mess, and I don't know that there's, unfortunately, Americans like a magic bullet, take a pill, do one thing, and it'll be okay. That's not what's happening.
Right, I'm going to call it a hot potato anyway. Let's move on here to the next subject matter. We've just got only a couple of minutes left here. The 800-pound gorilla in the room, guys, of course, the Ray Rice debacle right now. Where are we with this in terms of either figuring out the NFL is going to do something with Goodell, and if people are really going to take a serious turn and look at domestic abuse and how sports teams deal with it, how America deals with it?
I think it's a combination of both. I think first and foremost, an individual investigation is going on where they're actually investigating to see whether or not Commissioner Goodell actually did know about it. Obviously, the gorilla in the room, as you will, can say that the NFL office did have the tape. But at the same time, I think it's kind of disconcerting that an event such as that has to happen in order for people to talk about one of the silent killers. They say what cancer is the silent killer. They often say domestic violence is something that is often not talked about in everyday person's home, as well as people that are rich millionaires that play sports. And unfortunately, this had to happen, and it's thought provoking. But I think people will look at it. How long? Who's to say?
Right. Well, so I'm going to let you have the last word. Katie, I want to begin with you in this situation. We have a situation I mentioned earlier where you have a woman wearing a Rice jersey at the Baltimore Ravens game saying, hey, look, several, yes, but I'm just talking about one that they interviewed and said, look, she hit him first. Are we getting mixed messages here?
Well, that situation is asking one woman or a couple of women wearing a jersey to speak for all women, which is kind of ridiculous. There is absolutely a culture of normalized male violence. We live in that. We saw that with the Yes All Women hashtag earlier this year. A lot of people, myself included, hadn't realized they were a survivor of abuse until that discussion became more public and we started talking about what consent and interrelationships are supposed to look like. So a couple of women in Ray Rice jerseys, sure, or they could just they had them already and they're a fan, and so they're just sort of, wearing what they've got in order to be, defiant. But the idea that Goodell didn't know is ridiculous, and this investigation is more ridiculous than that even. It's being run by a guy who works for the law firm that the Ravens owner worked at for 30 years. So the idea that we're going to get to the truth because of it is just,
Okay, we got about 40 seconds. Wallace, last word.
Yeah, Commissioner Goodell was paid $44 million last year by the NFL. They didn't pay him just because he's a nice guy, because he helped the owners make a lot of money. I think the owners are going to look for every way to try and keep him on board because of that. His credibility is pretty damaged right now. His brand is pretty damaged. But just keep that number, $44 million, in mind. They're not paying him that just because he's got a bright smile.
Right, and he makes a good point there in closing here. The NFL is looking to raise billions of dollars, even more, amongst the ownership here. Can Condoleezza Rice do it? A good PR stunt or ploy to get her in here. She can't raise the money. A lot of owners don't really want her in.
Hey,
but
she's a good recruiter for Stanford basketball.
Well, anyway, that'll have to be the last word. Brandon, Katie, Wallace.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
And you're watching Arise America. All right. Guys, great.